Good morning and welcome to the Office of Procurement Regulations virtual sensitization session on the Simplified Procurement Regulations and Contract Reporting Requirements. I am Rhonda Joy Lewis, Corporate Communications Officer, and we are pleased by your response to our session today. We have with us this morning Ms. Melissa Rampnarsingh, Senior Capacity Development Specialist, Ms. Devika Singh, Policy Officer, and Ms. Classian Ellis, Senior Auditor. In today's session, we will delve into the overview of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act, the Simplified Procurement Regulations, and Contract Reporting Requirements. Before we begin today's proceedings, please allow me to go through some helpful tips for a successful session. Note that your mics will be muted. Your questions during the session can be sent via the chat option on the Teams platform. These questions will be collated by our team and addressed in our question and answer segment after the presentation. Please keep your contributions helpful and be considerate to our presenters and other participants. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be shared via email and uploaded to our website. At this time, I would like to welcome our Chairman and Procurement Regulator, Ms. Beverly Khan, who will bring some opening remarks.
Good morning and thank you to Rhonda. I want to acknowledge His Worship Alderman Chinua Allen, Mayor of Port of Spain. I don't know if Her Worship Alderman Aquila Glasgow Warner has joined us as yet, but Mayor of Diego Martin, the Chairman of the Penal Debe Regional Corporation, Alderman Gautam Maraj, Aldermen, councillors of the Diego Martin Regional Corporation, the Port of Spain City Corporation, and the Penal Debe Regional Corporation. And let me correct myself, it is the Diego Martin Borough Corporation. I also want to acknowledge the presence of the Chief Executive Officers, Procurement Officers, and other staff of the corporations present this morning. The Office of Procurement Regulation is very pleased to be able to have this engagement session with these three corporations on the Simplified Procurement Regulations, as well as the reporting requirements. We understand, based on my discussion with Her Worship, the Mayor of Diego Martin, that you all are encountering some challenges, and we are really here to assist you to understand the requirements related to this, the introduction of the simplified procurements, and to continue our discussions with you in terms of the reporting requirements. It's extremely important as we progress this new procurement regime in Trinidad and Tobago that we comply with the requirements of the legislative framework. We have had, as many of you may have perused, our first annual report, which covered the period ending, the 12-month period ending April 2024. We have had a number of non-compliance issues being presented in that report. Very concerning, of course, for us here at the OPR is the non-compliance with the reporting requirements under the Act. This year, again, we will be producing a report that will cover the entire fiscal period. And we gave those entities that had not complied with the requirement the opportunity to remedy the situation, notwithstanding the fact that there were about 60 odd public entities that had not complied with the requirements to report. Even our last attempt to get public bodies to do their reporting was not very successful. we may have had about 15 out of the 60. So that's about a quarter of the public bodies. So once again, the entities that have not reported will be identified in the report that we are in the process of preparing. You do not now have the opportunity to fix the system because we had established a deadline. And unfortunately, we don't have the flexibility to extend that deadline because we have a commitment to report. There are implications when we extend for us, and they are quite severe because just as the public bodies are under the scrutiny of the OPR is under the scrutiny of the Parliament and the national community at large, right? So, and there are other areas in which we have non-compliance. You will find that as we progress into this fiscal year, the OPR is going to utilize the authority it has under the Act to take a step further in terms of public bodies that do not comply with the Act, right? So we don't want to go into that situation. So if it is that you are having challenges, it's very important as the corporations that you engage with your ministry, your line ministry, and see what can be done to assist you in being able to become compliant. The OPR is doing its part, but we do not have the authority in many instances, nor do we want it, of course, to be able to make you compliant in terms of the challenges that you are facing. So we continue to make ourselves available to our public bodies because we understand the system is new. It is new for the OPR as well. We understand that you are encountering challenges in perhaps understanding how certain things should be applied. We understand that you're having challenges with human resources, but it's very, very important that you engage with your line ministry and see what can be done. There's also the opportunity, if it is so presents itself, for some regional corporations to collaborate, right, where there are resource deficiencies. So I wouldn't want to continue longer. We have a presentation today, and then we will field your questions and any queries that you have. Thank you very much. We are expecting over 30 participants today. How much do we have online? Okay, so we have 24, so that is quite good. So we can proceed.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks, Ms. Khan, Chairman and Procurement Regulator of the OPR. Well, at this time, without further delay, we would now like to welcome Ms. Melissa Ramkumar-Singh, Senior Capacity Development Specialist, who will now start the presentation of the overview of the Act. Melissa.
Thank you, Rhonda. Good morning and welcome to today's sensitization session. As Rhonda mentioned, I am Melissa Ramkumar-Singh and I will be presenting a brief overview of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act. Then I'll hand you over to my colleagues, Ms. Singh, who will provide an overview of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Simplified Procurement Regulations 2024, and Ms. Clessian Ellis, who would outline the contract reporting requirements for public bodies. So let's get started. So firstly, what we have here is the Public Procurement Framework, and the Public Procurement Framework for Trinidad and Tobago comprises the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act 2015 as amended, the suite of Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Regulations, and the handbooks and guidelines issued by the OPR. And the handbooks and guidelines provide the operational procedures for public procurement in Trinidad and Tobago. So let's take a closer look at some provisions in the Act. So firstly, the Act aims to provide for public procurement and for the retention and disposal of public property in accordance with the principles of good governance, and it highlights accountability, transparency, integrity, and value for money. So it is important to note here that the Act incorporates not only procurement, but retention and disposal are also key components. So let us review some of the definitions under the Act. So Section 4 of the Act, which you must be familiar, outlines the definition of public bodies. And you would already know that municipal corporations established under the Municipal Corporations Act are public bodies. Section 4 of the Act also defines public money. And as you can see from the definition, it is very broad. It includes money that is received or receivable by a public body, and I wouldn't read all, but I'm highlighting 3 for you here. So received or receivable by a public body, spent or committed for future expenditure by a public body, raised in accordance with a written law for a public purpose. And the definition of procurement proceedings in the Act encompasses the entire procurement cycle. From the planning stage, it goes on to the solicitation of tenders, awarding of contracts, and contract management to the formal acknowledgement of completion of the contract. So this highlights that you're not only focused on the actual awarding of the contract, but you must also emphasize each stage identified here in the Act for public procurement, because each has a significant impact on the outcome. Section 5 of the Act outlines 11 objects that public bodies are required to promote, and these serve as the guiding principles for procurement, retention, and disposal activities. So let's take a look at a few of the objects. So firstly, we have accountability. This ensures that procurement professionals and public officers are held responsible for procurement and disposal decisions. Integrity relates to the execution of procurement and disposal activities in a manner that ensures that corruption and conflicts of interest are avoided. Transparency requires placing appropriate information on the public procurement process in the public domain, and this makes it more difficult for corruption to go undetected. And you'll be familiar with some of the transparency elements in the Act, for instance, the publication of the annual schedule of planned procurement activities, the contract awards, and even submitting reports to us and the OPR publishing this information at the end of the annual, the fiscal period, which Ms. Khan had mentioned, the annual report to Parliament. This is also a transparency requirement. Value for money is defined in Section 4 of the Act as including the optimal balance of outcomes and input costs on the basis of the total cost of supply, maintenance, and sustainable use. So in this definition, it seeks to maximize procurement spending by not only looking at the acquisition cost, so not only the cost that you pay for what you bought, but also the cost of operation, maintenance, and the cost to the environment and the outcome that you derive from the particular good or service. So let's take a look at some of the key provisions in the Act as it relates to the OPR's compliance and enforcement rule. Section 6 of the Act gives the OPR the authority to deem any procurement that does not adhere to the Act as void and illegal. The Act also provides the OPR with the authority to conduct audits and periodic inspections of public bodies. The OPR can also investigate alleged breaches of the Act, and in terms of reporting, as you know, the OPR is required to submit the annual report to Parliament. So as you execute your procurement and disposal activities, there are some key players that would be involved in these processes. So let's take a look at their roles. So the accounting officers are the CEOs. The financial regulations of the Exchequer and Audit Act sets out the accountabilities of accounting officers, and this includes the responsibility for ensuring that the financial business of the state for which he is responsible is properly conducted, and that the public funds entrusted to his care are properly safeguarded and applied only to the purposes intended by Parliament. Accounting officers are also responsible for the financial duties of their departments and for the proper collection and custody of all public monies receivable by them and for accounts rendered by them or under their authority. So this slide summarizes the responsibility for the establishment of a procurement and disposal advisory committee. Regulation 21, subsection 1 of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Procurement Methods and Procedures Regulations requires that public bodies establish the Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee. And this advisory committee is responsible for reviewing reports, recommendations for contract awards, procurement proceedings, and property disposal files to determine whether there was adherence to the Act, the regulations, handbooks, and guidelines, adherence to the approved procurement and disposal strategy. And for those of you who do not know, the procurement and disposal strategy would document the analysis undertaken to arrive at the most suitable procurement or disposal approach. So this would ensure that the public body adhered to the required procedures that they had analyzed properly to arrive and justify the approach that was utilized. And PDAC will now look at this to ensure that it was complied with. You must also ensure achievement of the objects of the Act. So in essence, PDAC provides a level of assurance to the accounting officer that the required procedures were followed. And the slide also highlights the composition of PDAC, which would be the corporate secretary or head of legal, the head of finance, a subject matter expert, and such other members as may be necessary. So another key player is the named procurement officer, and the named procurement officer is responsible for public procurement. Section 61(2) requires that a public body have a procurement officer who shall be responsible for public procurement and the disposal of public property for that body, and that the office be notified in writing of the name and designation of the named procurement officer. Section 61(3) highlights that the procurement officer is responsible and liable under the Act, but in instances when an officer assumes the responsibility and acts in the capacity of the named procurement officer, then that officer would be culpable. So given the important role of the named procurement officer, it is important that you ensure that the individual who assumes this role has the requisite skills, knowledge, and competence to manage the complexity of procurement that is being executed by your public body. Section 55 of the Act requires that public bodies establish an operational committee referred to as the Disposal Committee. The Disposal Committee is responsible for recommending the best method of disposing of unserviceable, obsolete, or surplus stores and equipment. So let's now look at the regulations that govern public procurement. So this slide briefly mentions the 11 regulations that govern public procurement in Trinidad and Tobago. I will not go into the details of them, but you can access them on the OPR's website. They are very important. They provide some additional procedures that would guide your procurement processes. It also outlines the elements of the system, such as challenge proceedings and ineligibility proceedings. And later on in the session, you'll hear more about the simplified procurement regulations. The handbooks and guidelines also play a crucial role for compliance with the legislative framework, the regulatory framework that governs public procurement. And it ensures that you embed the requirements of the Act and your strategic mandates in your operations. The public bodies must ensure that they comply with the general guidelines issued by the OPR. And the OPR has issued 52 handbooks, guidelines, and procedural templates that can be accessed on our website. If applicable, public bodies must prepare handbooks and special guidelines on public procurement, retention, and the disposal of public property in conformance with the template and guidelines issued by the office. And this can also be accessed on the website, and submit the completed handbooks and special guidelines to the OPR for approval where applicable. So that concludes the brief overview of some key elements of the Act. And this highlight here the roadmap for compliance and the compliance assessment checklist. So as I close my portion of the presentation, I'd like to let you know that we, the OPR, will be issuing a roadmap for compliance and a compliance assessment checklist, which was developed to assist public bodies with understanding the requirements for compliance with the legislative, regulatory, and operational framework for public procurement in Trinidad and Tobago. So in the past, we would have issued the readiness assessment checklist, and that would have been done to assist pre-proclamation. Then we also revised it and issued it post-proclamation. Now we revise it again to include the simplified procurement regulations, and it summarizes the key elements of the Act, the regulations, and the guidelines to ensure that you have a benchmark to assess whether you are in compliance, whether you have established the required systems and procedures to be in compliance with the Act. So while this document is not an exhaustive list of requirements, it is a good benchmark and assessment to measure your progress over time as well. So please, I urge you to look out for this document, and we'll be issuing it soon, and ensure that you complete it and submit it to us in a timely manner. Thank you. And I'll now hand you over to Ms. Devika Singh.
Thank you, Melissa, and good morning, everyone. So as mentioned, this part of the presentation, we will focus on the simplified procurement regulations. So let's get started. Firstly, the simplified procurement regulations. These were developed as a result of the Amendment Act number 13, Section 4, which states, subject to regulations made under Section 63, the procurement of goods and services up to $1 million are exempt from the procurement requirements under this Act. So this diagram is a very simple depiction of what the term simplified procurement represents, right? So simplified procurement is involves basically both micro and small scale procurement, where micro procurement are all procurements under less than or equal $75,000, and small scale procurement are procurements that are more than $75,000, but up to $1 million. Now, with the simplified procurement, this provided for new provisions that was introduced under these regulations, right? So within the next few slides, we'll go through the new provisions that were introduced under simplified procurement. So one of the new provisions would be a definition for the term emergency procurement. Now, emergency procurement is defined under simplified as an exceptional and unforeseeable situation where life, property, equipment, or business continuity is immediately at risk, or standards of public health, welfare, or safety needs to be established without delay. So when conducting your procurement, and if it falls under an emergency procurement, you look to this definition to see if it is actually an emergency procurement, right? So another provision under the simplified regulations is something called a one-time waiver, which is afforded to suppliers and contractors. Now, this is under Section 10 of the simplified regulations. And this basically allows procuring entity to give a one-time waiver to suppliers and contractors. That is, they can award a contract to a supplier or contractor who was unable to provide satisfactory evidence at the point of evaluation of having paid all required taxes and contributions in Trinidad and Tobago. So they did not provide evidence of paying VAT or NIS at the point of evaluation. The procuring entity can give a supplier or contractor that one-time waiver of being awarded the contract. However, they would have a 6-month period in which to provide evidence of having paid these obligations under the Act, right? Next, our next provision would be the introduction, would be a reduction in the tendering timeframes for submission of bids by suppliers and contractors. So for open bidding, suppliers and contractors would now be given a minimum period by procuring entities of 10 working days from the date of publication of the procurement notice to submit their bids or proposal. With respect to limited bidding, suppliers and contractors would be given no fewer than 7 working days from the date of issuance of the solicitation document to submit their bids. Going forward, request for quotation, they will be given no fewer than 2 working days for submission of their bids. Single and sole source suppliers and contractors will be given 5 working days from the issuance of the solicitation document to submit their bids. Now, this is a very new one under the simplified, which is the introduction of a verbal quotation. Now, this allows procuring entities to obtain quotes from suppliers and contractors verbally. Now, while the process for this is, you could do this over the phone or maybe in person, you get the quotes from your supplier contractor. However, public bodies are required to document the verbal quotation using the template provided in the simplified procurement regulations. It is entitled Schedule 1 of the simplified regulations, and you are required to document, to fill out the form, and this is exactly a snapshot of the form in the simplified regulations for documenting your verbal quotation. Continuing with the new provisions under the simplified, direct contracting was introduced as a new procurement method, which is only applicable for your micro procurements. Now, direct contracting is a non-competitive method of procurement where the procuring entity directly selects its supplier or contractor for a particular procurement activity. So, for example, maybe your driver, he's on your road and the company vehicle shuts down. The procuring, and because of maybe the battery has exhausted its life, the procuring entity can go and purchase a battery directly from a provider and using direct contracting, right? Next, public bodies under the simplified are to establish and maintain a registry of suppliers and contractors participating in micro procurement. Whereas for small scale procurement, suppliers and contractors are to register on the procurement depository. So suppliers and contractors are required to be registered. Now for micro again, they have to be registered on the public bodies registry Whereas for small scale procurement, they have to be registered on the procurement depository, which is the OPR's procurement depository, right? So the last new provision under these regulations is the introduction of the reporting by category of goods, works, or services for micro procurement. Now, this is basically where public bodies would now be required to report in micro procurements in aggregate based on category of goods, works, or services and the type of procurement method. Now, my colleague, Ms. Cletian Ellis, she will go into more detail on this point in her part of the presentation. Okay, so now we'll take a look at the procurement requirements that will no longer be applicable under the simplified regulations, right? So while I would have mentioned that suppliers and contractors are required to be registered either on the public body's registry or the OPR's procurement depository, Section 18 of the simplified regulations outlines certain exemptions to registration for specific goods, works, or services, right? So where a public body engages in the payment of a public utility, one, that is for the payment of, let's say, electricity to TNTech, TNTech is not required to be registered on the registry, right? Also, in the acquisition of goods or services which are only applicable via an online platform. For example, a public body may want to procure services for, say, social media, from a social media platform, sorry, like Facebook, Instagram. Then under these circumstances, this provider is not required to be registered in the public body's registry or the procurement depository. Now, some other conditions under which I'll just go through the other points briefly. Some of the other conditions under which registration is exempt is where the acquisition of goods, works, or services required for the conduct of business of the state outside of Trinidad, where the acquisition, which is procuring of air travel, hotel services, and other expenses related to conferences, foreign trade affairs, and training seminars, or for the acquisition of goods, services, or works during an emergency. And we defined emergency in our previous slide. Now, continuing with the procurement requirements not applicable under simplified, public bodies are not required to publish its micro procurements on the annual schedule of planned procurement activities, right? So you no longer have to input your micro procurements on your annual schedule, but on your annual schedule, you are required to have your small scale procurement as well as your over 1 million procurements published on your website. And since we're speaking about annual schedules of procurement, just to be reminded that your annual procurement plan has to encompass both your small scale, micro, and above 1 million procurement contracts, right? Has to encompass that. So also on the simplified, it is no longer mandatory for the Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee to review procurements up to $1 million, as well as the standstill period for procurements under $1 million is no longer applicable under the simplified procurement. Public bodies are also no longer have to publish the notice of award of procurement contract or framework agreement for simplified regulations. And lastly, challenge proceedings as set out in the Act is not applicable under simplified regulations. However, suppliers and contractors can lodge a complaint under section 8 of the simplified regulations with respect to the simplified procurement. Okay, so now we'll move on to procurement requirements that remain applicable under the simplified procurement regulations. And this would be the public bodies are still required to adhere to the objects of the Act. They are also required to include all simplified procurements as part of the annual procurement plan, as mentioned. They are required to follow the 4 stages of the public procurement, and they are also required to submit their quarterly reporting to the OPR. Now, with that being said, the OPR still maintains its oversight functions under Section 13(1) of the Act in terms of the functions of the office as outlined in the Act remains applicable under these simplified regulations. All right, so given all that was said with regards to simplified regulations, we'll just bring everything together and do a quick recap of what was discussed between micro versus small scale procurement, just to give us an idea in summary of what was said, so we'll get the key points, right? So the annual procurement plan under micro, you have to include micro under in your annual procurement plan, as well as include small scale procurement in your annual procurement plan. The annual schedule of procurement activities, micro procurements are not included in your schedule, but they are included in your small scale procurement. With respect to PDAC, the Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee, they are not required under micro, neither small scale procurement to review contracts under $1 million. With respect to the requirement of a standstill period, this is neither applicable for micro nor small scale. Requirement of public notice to award, this is not required again under micro nor small scale procurement. Must inform each participating supplier or contractor of contract awarded or entry into contract or framework agreement. This is not applicable for micro procurement, but it is applicable for small scale procurement. Verbal quotations, now this can only be utilized for micro procurement and it cannot be utilized for small scale procurement. Direct contracting, this can be used for micro procurement, but not for small scale procurement. Suppliers and contractors are required to be solicited for procurement and under using a procuring entities registry. For micro procurement, yes, and for small scale procurement, the suppliers and contractors are required to be registered on the procurement depository. So again, small scale procurement depository, micro procurement, public bodies registry, right? Quarterly reporting, this is required for both micro and small scale procurement. Now, this slide, we just want to close off by showing you the general guidelines for simplified procurement. This was recently uploaded to the OPR's website, as well as the simplified regulations. This is also on the OPR's website, so we do urge you to go on the website and get familiar with these documents. So we have a snapshot of it here. So when you do go on the website, you have an idea of what you will be looking for, right? So with that being said, this part, I've concluded my part of the presentation, and I will now hand you over to Ms. Cassiano.
Good morning, everyone. Contract reporting requirements. The area I think that's some parties, public bodies, they're not very interested in, but hopefully after this presentation, y'all will be enlightened
Hopefully you would see it as not as challenging as most people make it out to be. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's look at why and when we have to do these particular reporting requirements. The why is obvious. It's a statutory obligation. But while that is true, we really want the corporations, we want all public bodies to understand that the why is deeper than just the fact that it's the law. Why are you required? Why should you spend time? Why should you invest into doing these particular reports and submit them on time to the OPR? There are many benefits that are there, not just for the country of Trinidad and Tobago, and it's not just for OPR to be able to see your information, but it's actually information that you yourselves, your very corporations can use. The CEOs that are present, the mayor, the councillors, as you all take the information that comes in, procurement is a very big portion of what happens at the corporation level. And so understanding it and seeing it in detail allows you to have some additional benefits. It can help you reduce your cost, which you want to do because we know most corporations, they have limited funding, but has a very wide obligations. They have a lot of stuff that needs to happen. You have a lot of requirements and activities that the burgesses want you to complete. And so if you're able to see where you're not spending money in the right way, if you're able to gain efficiencies, which these reports provide, it gives you a detailed picture of what is happening in your particular organization, in your corporation. You would see where there may be variations and contract extensions that can be avoided. You will see duplications where you can actually enter into framework agreements. It provides really good insight into your procurement activities, and there are many benefits that could be gained. It also shows you useful patterns. So you're able to plan better for the next fiscal period when you do these things. As you report, if it's complete, if it's accurate, there's a lot of managerial information that the corporations can use to be more effective, to be able to actually identify certain trends. For example, why is it that when you put a tender out or you solicitate suppliers, only specific suppliers respond? And sometimes they only respond to particular types of activities. That is information that's useful for your corporation. Sometimes you're stuck with a supplier that you don't want, but it's the only person that is responding. And so having this information, putting it into the report, yes, you're submitting it to the OPR, but it's information that you can use internally as well. So we want you to see the why beyond it being just, this is something we have to do. It's information that helps the country govern better and get more to you. It's also a good way for you to be able to evidence the fact that you are actually doing a lot of work. You may need additional procurement staff and resources because of the quantum of transactions that you all are conducting, as well as to be able to say, well, listen, we're doing this much with so little, but we could do more and we're doing it efficiently. So it provides you with that type of internal data. So when you all complete it, it's not just for us. We want you all to be able to use it. So that's part of the why. The when, the law has made it very, very simple. It's 21 calendar days at the end of each quarter, after the end of each quarter. So if you count 21 days after December, April, June, September, it's going to land you up in January the 21st. You're going to end up in May the 20th. Well, it's supposed to be April the 21st, so that's wrong here on the slide. July the 21st, and then October the 21st, respectively. All right. And that applies whether it is micro reporting or if it is reporting for anything over $75,000. So let's look at how to report to the OPR. Firstly, you want to ensure that you have the correct OPR reporting templates and checklists, and those are issued on a quarterly basis to your organizations. They go to your accounting officer, as well as in many instances, the named procurement officers. If at the end of each quarter, probably 3 weeks in at the end of each quarter, you've not received an email from the OPR indicating that this is the reporting template for the quarter that you are in, feel free to contact the OPR. But that is the way that you would receive it. It comes via email. And once you receive that email, the email comes with the templates, the checklist, and any other information that we believe is important and necessary for you to successfully and compliantly submit to the OPR. Of course, the templates include instructions, so we ask you to read the instructions. Those particular tabs within the worksheet, they are colored. Most of them are red. So when you open your templates, those are the first worksheets and they are colored. There are instructions there for you. They provide really helpful tips on how to populate each of the fields. Of course, once you are completing it, we want you to review it thoroughly for compliance with the instructions, and the checklist will help with that. Rename the templates as instructed. This is important. While it may seem mundane to your organization, OPR is receiving templates back, completed templates back from all public bodies. And so if it's not correctly named, there is going to be a challenge with us as we receive it to know that you have submitted and that you've submitted on time. So rename it as instructed. Also within your draft emails for submission, wherever information has not been completed, mandatory fields have not been filled out, you have an obligation to say to the OPR, this is why I've not completed those particular fields. This is why these particular sheets have not been done. It is not for us, it's not for you to just assume that if you leave it out, we will understand that you don't have the information. You need to say that to us. And of course, finally, you would submit your report to the email address that is given. And this email here is also on all of the templates, and it comes along with the instructions. So let's take a quick look at the micro procurement contract reporting template. It's a very simple one, and there are just three areas of reporting that we actually need public bodies and your corporations to provide us with details on. Firstly, awards. And awards can be contracts or purchase orders, and they must be new awards. Now, I want to put a little plug here, because with micro procurement reporting, now that we have the division between micro procurement, small scale procurement, and everything that is over 1 million, the reporting is the tail end of your actual procurement activity. You should have known well in advance of reporting to the OPR whether or not you would have been using the micro procurement methodology, whether you would have been using the small scale methodology, or whether you would be using the actual act to conduct your procurement. And so reporting to us, it is not based on the fact, well, you know, we have an award and it's less than 75,000, so it goes into this particular report. All of your transactions that you carried out utilizing micro procurement methodology, so whether it's contracts that are issued or purchase orders, standalone purchase orders that are issued as well, they are captured in this particular template in the award. So we have the template, we'll see them shortly. It's the micro procurement sheet, and you're going to capture all of your contracts and purchase orders for the quarter. And it's only new ones that are issued within the quarter. Variations are variations in relation to your micro procurement transactions. And so these variations, unlike the award sheet, can be for transactions that occurred in quarters that would have already passed. So in those instances, let's say in Q1 that's coming, as you start to record your information, you may realize that something that would have happened in Q4 between July and September now actually has a variation. That variation gets reported. If it was reported in the micro In Q4, it's reported as a variation in the micro in Q1. So you're matching your transactions. If this particular transaction is not, again, if the variation is less than 75, it automatically comes into the variation sheet for micro procurement. It has to tie to wherever the contract or the purchase order would have been originally reported. All right. And finally, we have payments. All of your payments in relation to micro procurement transactions. And again, I'm stressing not just payments that are less than 75,000, because you could have a payment for a contract that you issued under the over 1 million and you paid, let's say, 70,000 on that contract. It does not filter into your micro procurement sheet. You have to match your transactions. If it's micro, all of the activities related to that micro procurement gets reported in your micro procurement sheet. And similarly, when we look at what is happening for everything in small scale and over 1 million, if it's originally reported as small scale or over 1 million, all of the other activities are also going to be reported in that sheet, regardless of its value. So let's take a look quickly, a snapshot of these 3 sheets that are part of the micro procurement template. The micro procurement award sheet just has these columns, the name of the public body that must be repeated. That is how our system knows and would read whatever activities you have written. So we want to see the name of your public body. You're going to select, all of these are drop-down options. You're going to select your good, work, or service. You're going to select the category of goods and services. And we provided in the template a listing of all of the goods, works, and services. What should be easy on this particular sheet is the fact that these categories of goods, works, or services are the same categories that you utilize when you are budgeting for your national to get your actual budget subventions and allocations. It's the same categories. So wherever you are applying, whether it's however your budget is returned to you, in whatever line items, sub line items that exist, those same categories are the categories we're looking at here. So wherever you incur spending, procurement related in those categories, that's what we expect to see. The procurement methods, they are listed. Now, if you use a procurement method that is not in the drop-down option, please have a conversation with the OPR. All of the methods that you should be using that are allowed under the Act is already included. So you're selecting from the methods that are there. The number of times the method used is where we have the aggregation happening. And I'm going to use a very simple example. Let's say, for example, your corporation is doing catering. Obviously, the name of your corporation will be inserted under the name. Goods will be a selection or services depending on how you would see that particular procurement. And then, of course, the category would be catering. If you would have used single source once, and then you would have used selective tendering 10 times, you're going to actually have 2 line items. One of them will say goods, catering, and your procurement method would be single source, and number of times would be 1. And then you have a second line saying goods, the category of goods would be catering again. The method is what is going to change. It will now say selective tendering. And if it was 10 times, you will then insert the number 10 times. So you are going to be sitting down and aggregating those figures to report to the OPR. The total value of award match the aggregation. So the one time you had the catering, you may have paid $1,000. 10 times when you add it together, it may come up to $50,000. That is the value that then appears under your total value of award. And was an RFQ used? That's simple, yes or no. And again, it's a drop-down option. The next sheet is the variation sheet. I'm not going to go through the areas where we have the public body name. I think everybody now understands that that is to be repeated. You're going to insert your contract or purchase order reference number. So whatever number that you would have had internally that ties to this particular transaction that's being varied, that is the reference we expect to see. The initial total value of contract or purchase order is whatever the original value is. And we're seeing a lot of public bodies making the error of providing us with either the variation value under the initial value of contract, and as well providing us sometimes with just zero and giving us a value of variation. It cannot be zero. If it is, you would have had an actual transaction. So it's the originating value of your purchase order or contract, and then the value of your variation. Another place where we're seeing common errors is that persons would either repeat the value, the original value, or they will insert the value plus the variation. So I'm going to use another example here. Let's say we had a contract. Let's say it's purchase order number 1. The original value of purchase order number 1 was $1,000. That purchase order, for some strange reason, we ended up asking for more stuff. It ended up being a value of $1,500. The value of the variation will be $500 and not $1,500. All right, so you want to pay attention to that as well. And finally, payments. The payments will be your total payments made. So it's not every line item that you made a payment on. You're just going to aggregate that and give us one number. This is the total value of all payments made for micro procurement. So now let's take a look at the standard, what we consider to be the standard reporting contract, and it covers all transactions or all procurement that would have been treated as small scale and over 1 million. The areas in this sheet covers the contract award and purchase order issued separately. So unlike the micro procurement where the information is tied together, in this particular sheet, there is a breakout because you are providing us with the details of each contract and the details of each purchase order. Under the contract awarded, as well as the purchase order, it's new. So it must be that the letter of award was issued during the reporting quarter. You are not to report every quarter on every contract that you still have enforced. It's only the new contracts that were issued in that quarter gets reported in the contract awarded, and similarly in your purchase order issue. I want to stress on the purchase order issue because there is a little bit of confusion with regards to POs in general. There are purchase orders that are attached to contracts, and those purchase orders are not standalone POs. They are purchase orders that are used to draw down on a contract. Those purchase orders are not captured in our purchase order issued field. This field or this particular worksheet only captures new standalone purchase order, which means that technically your purchase order is being used as a contract. There is no contract for this item. It's just a purchase order. And those are the ones that you're going to be reporting in this sheet here. Variations, similar to what we would have spoken about in the micro procurement sheet, covers all variations for that occurred in that quarter, but for any transaction. This transaction could be a contract that you had that started in 2022, and it's only being varied in 2024 or 2025. The variation gets captured here. So this is all transaction. Unfulfilled contracts, the Act defines unfulfilled as delayed, incomplete, and or terminated. Delayed, everybody seems to understand. Terminated, everybody is comfortable with. Incomplete is where we find all public bodies, not just the regional health, not just the regional corporations. Everyone seems to still have a little bit of confusion about what incomplete is. So I'm going to try to explain that right now for you. An incomplete contract is a contract where the contract end date has lapsed. So the contract is technically, from a timing perspective, let's say it was supposed to be completed, the obligations under that contract should have been completed on the 30th of September 2024. That time period has now lapsed, and there are still obligations under that contract that has not yet been completed. That makes the contract incomplete. So it's not where we have ongoing activities. It's not even where we have payments to be made so that the obligations under the contract is completed. But we waited on an invoice to pay, or we waited on money to be distributed to us in order to settle. It's none of those things. It's where the obligations for the service, whether it's the provision of a good, work, or a service, is still outstanding. And the time period, the closing date, or the contract end date has lapsed. Then that particular contract is deemed incomplete. And finally, payment progress. It's the same thing as we would have just described for micro procurement, and it covers all payments for any transactions that are over $75,000 once it would have been reported in this category previously. We're not going to go into details like we did on the micro procurement sheet into this particular sheet. There are a number of resources on the OPR website. The Q&A sessions, we've had 3 of them already, 4 I think, 3 of them we've had already that captures this particular sheet in detail, walking through every single column of data and explaining what those columns mean. This sheet also has instructions, and so the instructions also provide additional information into how to complete these sheets. So we're not going to get into that, but should you run into issues or finding it difficult to understand what is required in this sheet, please reach out to the OPR. Just want to take a little time to just identify some of the common errors. So we would have taken the opportunity to look at the submissions, those that we did receive from the 3 corporations that are with us today. And we just wanted to pull out the common errors that we saw so that you all would be aware of and just explain it a little bit more. And it's 3 main ones we would have identified. The missing mandatory information, which we've already spoken to. All of the columns of data that are mandatory are identified in the template. It's in brackets and it's in red. It is expected that you all will complete those fields. If there are pieces of information, we don't want you all to fabricate, we don't want you to make up information. If you genuinely don't have that data, then in your submission to the OPR, you must say to the OPR, this information is not available, why it is not available, so that we will understand that there is a reason why that particular field was not completed, or fields, all right? Incorrect use of the lesson learned field. And this is specific to the template that is for over 75,000. That lesson learned field, most people are using it to explain either why deliveries were not made, reasons why they didn't have particular things explained in the sheet, information that's missing, etc. So actually, it's not lessons learned. The fields, you all need to complete the fields as instructed. So pay attention to those particular fields. It's not to be to have information included, like for example, awaiting payment, started and completed. It doesn't actually give us the information that is required. So we want you all to pay attention as you complete that particular field. And then, of course, we just spoke about the difference between the micro procurement and the over 75 values. Sometimes, based on what we've seen thus far from what is submitted, we would have seen information being included in the wrong template, or at least it's our assumption based on values. All right, so we want you all to pay attention to that. Finally, on the micro side, it's the aggregate. Persons have not done it. Now that you know when we say aggregate, what we mean, meaning tie them together. All of the methods that are the same for your category, you're providing us with that one line item with the aggregate value. And so here are just some key activities we want you all to remember before you submit. Provide the explanations for the missing mandatory fields. Of course, review before you submit. If you have any unique questions or you need clarification, touch base with the OPR. I know a lot of persons say we call and we don't get through. Okay, we do appreciate that. It is true. It's very, very difficult. Our lines are often quite busy. However, if you send us an email, trust me, we will get it and we will return your call, or we will actually send you back a response via email. All right, and that's even more timely than the phone calls, right? Ensure the data that you have actually matches the data type. There are date formats and there are text formats, there are value formats. They are all defined in your template. Follow those, please. Number 5, we want to ensure that the template that you're using is the correct one. Please do not modify the template. Don't make your own template. Don't create new things that don't exist in the template. Use the template as provided. For numbers, do not insert separators. The sheet is set up to do that on its own. If you put a separator into the number, it reads as a text, and so the system does not pick it up. So you just enter your numbers, the sheet will do the rest. And finally, of course, ensure that reports are not submitted in PDF or any other modified format. We send you an Excel spreadsheet. As you complete it, return it to us in Excel as well. Yeah, so we have the reporting checklist. This is just 2 little icons to represent what they look like, just in case you've never seen them. They come along with your email packages. These checklists will help you to get your actual submissions compliant. They tell you what it should have and what it should not have. We guarantee that if you follow them, you should be in a good place. So thank you for giving us an opportunity, and I hand back over to our moderator.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ellis, for your presentation on the contract reporting requirements of the bodies.